The alarm rang at 6:30 a.m., sharp and unforgiving, cutting through the thin walls of the cramped apartment. Daniel reached out and silenced it, but he didn't get up. He lay there staring at the ceiling, watching a small crack run across the paint like a reminder of everything in his life that felt broken. His chest felt tight, not from panic, but from exhaustion, the kind that sleep never seemed to fix. The room was cold. His heater had stopped working weeks ago, and he couldn't afford to repair it. A single chair sat in the corner, one leg slightly shorter than the others, wobbling whenever he used it. His shoes, worn thin at the soles, rested by the door, still dusty from yesterday's long walk home. Daniel swallowed hard, the familiar weight of worry pressing against his throat that he sat up slowly and rubbed his face with both hands. Another day of nothing. No job to go to, no calls to return, no messages except overdue reminders from bills he could no longer open without feeling ashamed. His phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark, silent. He picked it up anyway, hoping for something, anything, that might suggest his situation was about to change. There was nothing. Daniel stood and walked to the small mirror above the sink. The man looking back at him seemed older than his years. Dark circles framed his eyes, and his shoulders sagged as if carrying an invisible load. He tried to straighten up, to look confident, but the effort felt forced, almost dishonest. A bitter smile crossed his face and disappeared just as quickly. As he poured water into a chipped mug, his hands trembled slightly. It wasn't fear that shook him, it was frustration. He had done everything he was told to do. He had worked hard, followed the rules, trusted the process. And yet here he was, counting coins, measuring every decision by what he could not afford. The unfairness of it all burned quietly inside him, not loud enough to scream, but strong enough to hurt. He sat on the edge of the bed and buried his face in his hands. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel it all, the disappointment, the shame, the anger, the deep, aching fear that this might be all his life would ever be. His chest tightened, and he took a slow, shaky breath to keep himself from breaking down completely. Then, from somewhere deep inside, another emotion surfaced. Not hope, not yet, but something close. A stubborn refusal to accept this as the end. Daniel lifted his head and stared at the floor, jaw clenched. He didn't know how or when things would change, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: staying like this would destroy him. That thought lingered, heavy but clear. And in that quiet moment, sitting alone in a room that reflected his struggle, a decision began to form. Small. Uncertain. But powerful enough to challenge everything he had resigned himself to. The decision didn't arrive with clarity or confidence. It came quietly, almost hesitantly, settling into Daniel's mind as he sat there staring at the floor. His heart beat faster, not with excitement, but with fear. Fear of trying again. Fear of failing again. Yet the thought refused to leave. Doing nothing, he realized, was no longer an option he could afford. He stood and paced the room, each step heavy, as if the floor might give way beneath him. His mind replayed every rejection, every unanswered email, every interview that ended with polite smiles and empty promises. His stomach tightened, and for a moment, he almost laughed at himself. Who was he to think one choice could change anything? He had thought that before, and life had proven him wrong. Daniel stopped near the window and pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the city moved on without him. People hurried to work, cars passed in steady streams, and somewhere a bus hissed as it came to a stop. The world looked indifferent, almost cruel in its normalcy. His reflection in the glass stared back at him, eyes tired but alert. For the first time in weeks, he noticed something there, a spark of defiance. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. There was a message draft he had saved and deleted more times than he could count. An application for a small training program he had once dismissed as unrealistic. It would take time. It would take effort. And worst of all, it would take belief in himself, something he was dangerously low on. His hands shook as he opened the form again. Doubt flooded in immediately. What if this led nowhere? What if it only confirmed what he already feared, that he wasn't good enough? His chest tightened, and he felt the familiar urge to back away, to protect himself from disappointment. But then he thought of the cold room, the unpaid bills, the empty phone. That pain was real, constant, and unforgiving. Slowly, deliberately, Daniel began to type. Each word felt like a small act of courage. He hesitated often, rereading sentences, questioning himself, but he didn't stop. When he finally reached the end, his finger hovered over the submit button. Time seemed to slow, his breath shallow, his thoughts loud that he closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if bracing for impact, and pressed it. The screen refreshed. A simple confirmation message appeared. That was it. No applause. No instant relief. Just silence. Daniel sank into the chair, heart pounding. Fear still lingered, but it was different now. It had been joined by something unfamiliar yet steady, a sense that he had moved, however slightly, in the right direction. The choice he had made was small, almost invisible to the world, but to him it felt monumental. For the first time in a long while, Daniel didn't feel completely stuck. And that alone made the air in the room feel a little lighter. Days passed with no response, and the silence tested Daniel more than rejection ever had. Every morning, he checked his phone the moment he woke up, heart lifting for a split second before sinking again. Each empty screen felt like a quiet verdict on his worth. He tried to distract himself, cleaning the apartment, rereading old notes, even going for long walks, but his thoughts always returned to the same question: had he made the right choice, or just delayed another disappointment? One afternoon, as rain tapped softly against the window, his phone buzzed. The sound was so sudden that it made him jump. He stared at the screen, afraid to touch it, afraid that hope would betray him once more. When he finally opened the message, his breath caught. It wasn't a job offer. It wasn't success. It was an invitation for an interview. A rush of emotion flooded through him: relief, fear, excitement, and disbelief, all tangled together. His hands trembled as he reread the message, making sure it was real. For a brief moment, he smiled, then quickly wiped it away, as if smiling too soon might jinx it. The interview was scheduled for the next morning. There was no time to overthink. That night, sleep came in fragments. His mind replayed possible questions, imagined mistakes, rehearsed answers over and over again. Self-doubt crept in, whispering that he wasn't ready, that he would embarrass himself, that this chance would slip through his fingers like all the others. But beneath the doubt was something new: determination. He refused to let fear decide for him again. The interview room was small and unremarkable, but Daniel's pulse raced as if he were standing on a stage. The interviewer's expression was neutral, unreadable. Each question felt like a test of not just his skills, but his resilience. He spoke honestly, sometimes stumbling, sometimes surprising himself with the confidence in his own voice. He talked about failure without hiding it, about learning the hard way, about wanting to build something better than the life he had been surviving. When it was over, Daniel walked out into the street, legs weak, mind buzzing. He had no idea how he had done. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but there was also pride. He had shown up. He had tried. That alone felt like progress. As he walked home, rain-soaked and exhausted, he realized something important. Success wasn't a single moment or a sudden reward. It was a series of choices made despite fear, despite doubt, despite the risk of pain. And whatever happened next, Daniel knew he had already begun to change. The call came on an ordinary morning, the kind Daniel used to dread. He was sitting at the small table, staring into a cup of cheap coffee, when his phone rang. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. Old habits of fear and disappointment tugged at him. But he answered. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. He listened, barely breathing, as the words sank in. They were offering him a place in the program. Not a guarantee of wealth or instant success, but a real opportunity. When the call ended, Daniel sat in silence, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His chest felt tight, then suddenly light, as if something heavy had finally been lifted. The weeks that followed were demanding. The training pushed him harder than anything he had faced before. There were moments when he felt overwhelmed, moments when he questioned whether he belonged there at all. But this time, he didn't quit. Each challenge strengthened him, each failure taught him something valuable. Slowly, his confidence grew, not from praise, but from persistence. Months later, Daniel stood in a place he once thought was unreachable. He wasn't rich, but he was stable. He wasn't famous, but he was respected. More importantly, he believed in himself again. The bills were paid on time. The apartment was warmer. The mirror reflected a man who stood straighter, eyes clearer, shoulders no longer weighed down by shame. One evening, as he walked home under a fading sunset, Daniel thought about the life he had nearly accepted, the one defined by fear and resignation. He realized that success hadn't come from luck or talent alone. It had come from a single choice made at his lowest point. When hope felt dangerous and effort felt pointless, that he paused on the sidewalk and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because he had proven something to himself. Being broke had not been his failure. Giving up would have been. And he hadn't. That one choice hadn't just changed his situation. It had changed who he was.